Hi guys, so the Chancellor Rishi Sunak was on Sky News talking about the public sector pay freeze within the spending review. Now, I want you to remember that the right wing will attempt to frame this entire argument as the public sector is a liability while the private sector is an asset. And he does sort of go down that road, but let's hear what he had to say.
Say it shouldn't be either or. Public sector pay freeze, 1.3 million key workers, police officers, firefighters and the like. You are a very wealthy man. What does it say to those workers who are struggling?
Actually, I wouldn't have gone down this road. The idea, okay, yes, he is a very wealthy man. He's not going to be affected by this. I would have actually raised the point that MPs are getting a £3,000, over £3,000 pay increase. MPs are public sector workers. Well, they should be. They're civil servants to a certain extent. They're serving the public. They should be serving the public. Why are you getting a £3,000, over £3,000 pay increase, while police officers, firefighters, and the like, teachers, are not getting anything extra? I would have gone down that argument instead of actually attacking him personally, or highlighting his wealth. Yes, I think he's close to being a billionaire, if he's not already one. But that's somewhat irrelevant.
When you say, you're going to have a pay freeze this year.
Well, we've talked about the economic and fiscal context already. So given that context, I also then had a look at what's happening between the public and private sectors. And what we knew coming into this crisis, there's already a disparity with public sector wages generally higher than private sector wages.
Okay, so this is another argument. Look, the private sector, their wages are low at the moment. Public sector workers' wages are high at the moment. Then there's a disparity, and we need to level that. But the problem with this argument is that the if you're in the private sector, you have the ability to renegotiate your salary, on an individual basis. Not always, but generally. If the economy is doing very well, if your line of work is in demand, you have the ability to negotiate a pay increase. You can say to your boss, look, my job is very important for your business, or my service is very important for your business. I'm doing a good job. I demand more money, or otherwise I'm going to walk away. Now, in the public sector, you can't do that because it's set by the unions or collectively bargained, or it's set by the government. So when the economy is doing badly, yes, it's better to be in the public sector, because you are protected in a sense. The problem here is that he's framing it as if the public sector and the private sector offer the same type of service. They do not. We can't compare private security with the police. We can't compare, I don't know what, to the fire brigade. We can't compare private schools to public schools. I know in the UK are like private schools, they call them. Anyway, you know what I mean. State schools. You can't compare these two things because one is a business and the other is a public service. Now, if you want to, and the Conservative Party want to do this, they want to eliminate the public sector completely and replace it with the private sector, where, yes, businesses, you could negotiate with your boss, but there would be no protections. They want to move in the direction of complete elimination of worker protection. So yes, you could renegotiate your salary with your boss if you're a police officer, for example, but the boss can fire you at any moment because maybe they had a bad day or they didn't like your results this month. This is a service to citizens, the public sector, and it should be. I know I fully understand that there are people who work in the public sector who just warm seats, but generally the idea behind the public sector is it serves the people, and we shouldn't be treating it like the private sector.
And then that difference...
TUC disagrees with that, of course.
That difference, well, that's what the official statistics say.
They say once you weight in experience and age...
With the greatest respect, the latest figures from the Office of National Statistics that we have for 2019 show that even when you take into account characteristics and pensions, there was at least a 7% pay premium for public sector. That pay premium has certainly widened in the last 6 months, because what we've seen over the last 6 months is private sector wages have fallen by 1%, public sector wages have risen by around 4%. On top of that, people in the private sector are losing their jobs, their hours are being cut, they're being furloughed. None of that is happening in the public sector. Okay. So given the context...
Once again, do you value the public sector? And I fully understand that there are people who work in the public sector who probably don't do any work. As I said before, they warm the seat. But as the public sector, do we want to have a public sector? Do we want to have private police officers, or do we want to have publicly paid police officers? Do we want to have private teachers, or do we want to have public teachers? There is a cost. See, the problem is that if you... What's happening with this pay freeze is that it's not actually a pay freeze, it's a pay cut. Because there is the problem of inflation. If inflation is at 1% or 2% and your pay has been cut, or not has been frozen, sorry, it's basically, well, next year I'm going to be 1 or 2% worse off. So it's the same as a pay cut. That's why in many cases in the public sector, pay is linked to inflation. Or it used to be. I don't know what the situation is today. So going forward, you need to protect the public sector. And of course, if you don't, what's going to happen? Their wages are going to go below the private sector, and people working in the public sector will say, what's the point in doing this job? I should leave the public sector to work in the private sector. I'm a police officer in the public sector. I'm not earning, enough. I'm going to move to work in the private sector as a contractor or as a security guard or something like that. And then this diminishes the public sector, makes it much more difficult to provide services to the citizens. And then there is a stronger push by politicians to say, look, the public sector isn't working. We need to move we need to move in the direction of privatization. This is not just some sort of accident. It's not an accident that, oh, look, the public sector isn't working. Let's privatize. And this is what's going to happen with the NHS as well. At the moment, they're not touching the NHS because it would be a political disaster for the Conservative Party if they were to cut or freeze the wages of the NHS. But we'll come back to that later.
I couldn't justify an across-the-board universal pay increase for the public sector. So what we've done instead is taken a targeted approach. So that means the NHS, subject to the recommendations of the pay review bodies, will get a pay rise next year. So nurses, people working in hospitals. For everyone else, we've paused.
See, because it's easy, because it's politically easier. And this is for a short period. So I can guarantee you, as soon as this pandemic is over, and I said this before on this channel, as soon as the pandemic is over, the NHS will be thrown under a bus. NHS workers will either have their pay frozen or cut, because Rishi Sunak will come out later, if he's still the Chancellor, he would say, after this pending review, I'm sorry, we have all this debt. The NHS, we clapped for them. We did our bit. But it's so expensive now. They did a good job in dealing with the pandemic, but the pandemic is over, so we can get back to normal. And back to normal is putting the NHS under stress, underfunding it, and understaffing it as well, putting extra strain on the workers who are already there, and not giving them the resources that they need to survive. That's business as usual. And we want to get back to business as usual as soon as possible. But at the moment, we can't go in that direction because there would be a rebellion. maybe from within the Conservative Party even. You know, there are some decent people within the Conservative Party, and they care about, I don't know how they manage to stay within the party, but they care about the NHS. They care about their constituents. And they know that, you know, if the NHS was underfunded, or if the NHS staff didn't get a pay increase, they would have people, you know, knocking on their doors. So it's not politically savvy at the moment to to impose a pay restriction or a pay freeze on the NHS workers. But there is a sort of cynical aspect to this as well, that we know that the NHS, there would be a rebellion with the NHS, so we're not going to touch them. But we will touch the others. We will touch the firefighters or the police officer or the teachers.
Pause pay rises next year, but we want to make sure that we protect those on lower incomes. So if you're in the public sector and you earn less than £24,000, which is the UK median salary, so half your viewers probably earn less than that. That's the
I know I didn't want to go down the road of attacking him personally, but does Rishi Sunak understand what it's like to live on less than £24,000 a year? Does he have any idea? He probably spends, that much on champagne or wine per year. But once again, it's somewhat irrelevant. His wealth is irrelevant to a certain extent. I still believe that if MPs were on the minimum wage, or on the living wage, as they call it in the UK, they would have a better understanding of the problems ordinary people face. And I think a lot of those problems would be fixed much quicker.
Median, then you will get at least a £250 pay increase. So making sure that we protect, that's over 2 million people in the public sector who...
So I've been trying to do some research on this £250, and it's £250 for the life of this spending review. So it's a year. It's not for, it's not a month. It's not for 6 months. It's £250 for the year. Can you find, accommodation in the UK that costs, £250 a month? I don't know, in London. So I just want to read some of the comments that have come in from, for example, the Police Federation Union. So they've called this a kick in the teeth for police officers. They said that rewarding those who have played a vital role in the fight against the virus with a pay freeze is nothing short of a disgrace. Because, we have to remember, of course, that the doctors and the nurses have been on the front line, but also police officers have been on the front line as well. They've been putting themselves in harm's way, dealing with the public directly, dealing with ridiculous idiots in the public who are protesting against lockdowns and the like. Police officers are putting themselves in the front line, and they're not getting a pay increase here. They also said that a handful of officers will get an additional £250 for the lowest paid workers, but only those who are already on appallingly low salaries for such a dangerous job do so. So, this £250 is for the people on the lower end of the scale, but how is that a help to them? How is that going to improve their lives? How is that an evaluation of their abilities, of their service to the public? Once again, this is an attempt to divide workers, divide them into public sector, liability, private sector, an asset. And I truly believe this is part of a bigger picture, an attempt to reduce the public sector in the long term and transfer resources, transfer money, transfer responsibility from the public sector to the private sector, which is more or less privatization. Let me know in the comment section, guys, what you think about all of this. As always, your comments are greatly appreciated. Thanks a lot.